Okay, it's 11:02, so I'll keep an eye on this. I'll keep an eye on the door and let people in as they get here. But my name is Kelly Landacre, and I am with Midwest Urban Strategies, and I'm very excited that you're here with us today to have this conversation about understanding and leveraging available funding sources for early childhood education and care. I want to talk about a little bit of being issues right as we get started. Would like for you to everyone stay on mute if you would, please. We will be monitoring the chat for questions. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat and also include your name and organization. Well, depending on the question, be able to answer some of these questions during the presentation, and then we'll also have some time at the end for some additional questions. And I want to point out too that the little more button there with the three dots, if you click on that, should you need closed captioning, that is available for you as well. So it's just above the button that says more with three dots. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. So our agenda today, we're going to take a look at early childhood education registered apprenticeship. We're going to be considering exploring effective funding sources and strategies in three different areas: federal, state, and local funding. And also we're going to talk about how funds can be combined for early childhood education registered apprenticeship. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce to you the Executive Director of Midwest Urban Strategies, Tracy Carey.
Thanks, Kelly. It's great to get this time with everybody today. Thanks so much for joining us and spending some time over your lunch hour or thereabouts on this important topic related to funding in the early childhood education registered apprenticeship space. So Midwest Urban Strategies is a consortium of workforce boards organized across the Midwest region, primarily Department of Labor Region 5. And we organized back in 2014 in order to really lean into the idea of innovation in the public workforce system. The Workforce Investment Act, the law that formerly governed the public workforce system, was transitioned to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act in 2014. And the boards that organized together were really interested in that idea of innovation and what that might look like in a public context. And so we really leaned into work related to innovation.
Tracy G laugh.
Innovation and equity and inclusion practices. And early childhood education really rose to the top as an issue that we could really dig into. We saw that really as an issue that affects the dual customer base that workforce boards are poised to serve, both job seekers as well as employers, as well as the broader economic vitality of our communities. And so we got busy doing this work, and last year had the opportunity to help stand up the Early Childhood Workforce Connector. I serve as a subject matter expert on workforce development in partnership with Early Childhood Workforce Connector, or ECWC. You'll hear us call it that as well. And ECWC was organized to really promote the development, launch, and expansion of registered apprenticeship programs to support and sustain a diverse, inclusive, well-qualified, and well-compensated early childhood education workforce. And we all know how fragile the early childhood education space is in terms of its resource base. And so that whole idea about sustaining a diverse, inclusive, well-qualified, and well-compensated early childhood education workforce really did require looking at how we properly resource the development of those talent development strategies using registered apprenticeship, so that early childhood education programs, providers, and sponsors could do that successfully. The ECWC is organized as an intermediary organization. It's made up of 3 primary partnering organizations and then a number of other collaborative partners. And together we organized this intermediary that is focused specifically on creating and expanding registered apprenticeship in the early childhood education space. So let's dig into a little bit about early childhood education registered apprenticeship, just as a way to level set. And then we'll move into some conversations about funding for ECE. So first, why registered apprenticeship in ECE? What we know is that the workforce that is employed in the early childhood education space is challenged by oftentimes very low wages, limited access to benefits, and in uneven abilities to advance within their career. And so we see registered apprenticeship as an opportunity to address those job quality challenges. So registered apprenticeship helps us to build knowledge, skills, and credentials among the early childhood professionals who become registered apprentices. It also enables us to bring supportive services to those apprentices to help them navigate life and work as they're working to advance in their career. Registered apprenticeship really focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And those core components are really important in the early care space. It's something that early care has been deeply committed to for a long time. So there's a great match there. It also creates the opportunity for folks to have a profitable career pathway in early childhood education. It helps us to really move those wages up because there is embedded in registered apprenticeship the opportunity for wage progression as a part of registered apprenticeship programs. And then lastly, and a big part of why we're here today, it does give access to funding that is specifically designated to support registered apprenticeship writ large. And when it comes to early childhood education, registered apprenticeship in that space as well. So there are a number of benefits to registered apprenticeship. And I'm sure that those of you who have joined us here today have had the opportunity to participate in other webinars and learning labs that MUS and ECWC and its network of partners have facilitated, and you've heard about all of the benefits that accrue when you establish a registered apprenticeship program. It helps communities, it helps employers, both childcare employers as well as the broader non-childcare employer community. And it also helps apprentices as they're able to increase their wages and earn a nationally recognized credential that is portable and something that they earn and keep throughout the duration of their career. So we know from research, and there's been a fair amount of it done over the last 15 years or so, that registered apprenticeship is a worthwhile investment in talent development. We know that there is a strong return on investment, and a big part of that ROI is related to reducing staff turnover, building the skills of the workforce, increasing employee engagement, and improvement in work culture. There's also a correlation to revenue for businesses who participate in registered apprenticeship. So there's a cash benefit to those employers who dig into this strategy as well. And so the ROI is clear, but I think it's important to acknowledge that when you're setting up something as rigorous as registered apprenticeship, there are costs related to that. And in the early childhood education space, it can be challenging to have the resources necessary in order to really set up and maintain that registered apprenticeship program. And we at ECWC meet with partners all the time, every day, who are either currently operating or looking to begin a registered apprenticeship program. And one of the first things that we hear is, how do we cover the costs related to doing this or expanding it? What does that look like? So there are some real upfront costs and some ongoing maintenance costs that when you're looking at building or expanding your program, you need to consider how you're going to build those in. For that initial setup, you're building out a set of standards that you're going to get registered. There's time that's required for that. There's the investment in staff development and knowledge around what those standards requirements will include. All of that, it is a real cost to you as the sponsor. There's also the cost related to training and education. So we know that registered apprenticeship is an earn while you learn model. And so that means that apprentices are being paid a wage while they are also learning the skills of the job that they are moving through, and beginning at that sort of entry level, and throughout the terms of that apprenticeship program, moving on to mastery. And that happens both on the job as well as in related technical instruction. And both of those have costs related to them that, as a sponsor or an employer, it's important that you think about how you're going to cover those resource needs, and that you're planning for that ahead of time. As I mentioned before, as an earn while you learn model, registered apprenticeship means that somebody is earning a wage as they're working in and throughout their apprenticeship program. Those wages are also progressive. So what that means is that as people are moving through their apprenticeship program, whether it's a time-based program, a hybrid program, or a competency-based program, there are markers that indicate when a wage increase is required. And so covering those wage increases is one of the pain points that we've heard folks concerned about. How are they going to do that? And so that's one of the things that we work to help sponsors and employers think through as they're developing their programs. The need for materials and equipment is another investment that needs to be made. If you're doing the on-the-job learning and you're going to be doing any in-house training, there's the materials related to that work. And so again, that needs to be built into your budget, your planning for the establishment and maintenance of that registered apprenticeship program. And then this isn't last, really. There's lots of other things that go into setting up a registered apprenticeship program. But the last thing I'll point out here is the cost of recruitment. And we all know that recruitment is an expensive but necessary requirement of running a business. And the cost for recruiting apprentices is a real cost. It's targeted in a different way, and we're certainly available to help think through what that can look like. But these are real costs, and they need to be considered as you're looking to build out your registered apprenticeship program. So let's dig into how we're going to think about ways to bring the resources that are necessary to support your registered apprenticeship program. We know that the reality is we can't just raise rates, right? You can't just go and increase the burden on parents because they're already stretched thin. If you're participating in a subsidy-based program, you can't increase it beyond what subsidy pays. So your ability to bring revenue in strictly related to the operation of your business is limited. That's one of the challenges of early childhood education. So we want to look at other ways to bring resources that can help you to expand your program. So first, let's level set on the kinds of funding that are necessary to support early childhood education programs, sort of writ large, right? Folks are out there finding resources for a variety of components of their service delivery. So you have professional development needs, you have infrastructure and facilities, you have, the quality enhancements that you want to do to your programs. There's research that needs to be done. There's things around advocacy and policy. How do we do a good job of supporting parents and engaging them? These are all different ways that we need to resource our early childhood education programs generally. And some of these are just embedded in our operating models. And some of them require bringing in resources from other places beyond our general pay structures. So as we go in, before we get too far, I want to just start with a poll. And so how familiar are you with the funding sources for early childhood education registered apprenticeship programs? We'll give folks just a few minutes to get finished here. All right. So it looks like we've got about half of you are somewhat familiar, a good third, not at all. And so I think this will be a great opportunity for us to really spend some time talking about what those resources look like. And we do plan at a later learning lab to dive more into how you go about securing those resources. So that'll be a future learning lab. Stay tuned for that. But for now, we just want to take a look at what the types of funding are that are out there that you could consider pursuing to help cover the costs related to operating your programs, and a little bit about, at a high level, what those funding opportunities include. So there are 3 areas that we're going to look at today. The first is federal funds. And these are all of the federal departments that we've identified that provide resources. There are likely others that are not on this list, but the federal government does make investments in workforce development. It makes investments in research. It makes investments in childcare, in a whole variety of places that our work in early childhood education can intersect. And so it's important to just be aware of how the federal government puts out opportunities, where those resources are, and then how to access them. Again, we will cover that in a later learning lab, but I just wanted you to understand that there are a variety of federal departments that that cover these types of services and make resources available for that. Your state is another opportunity. So I think all 50 states and the territories have received apprenticeship expansion grants at this point. The Department of Labor made a significant investment in registered apprenticeship. It's been around for more than 100 years, but it wasn't until about 15 years ago that they really began to look at how to use registered apprenticeship as a strategy to grow talent beyond the traditional sort of building trades and manufacturing space. And so they began to invest resources into states and programs to expand apprenticeship in other occupations and industries. And those state apprenticeship expansion grants is one of the mechanisms that they use. States also, and many of you may already be participating in some of these, will put out workforce development grants. With COVID, of course, there was a lot of resource that was put out from the federal government to states, and then states disseminated from there, ARPA funds. You may be familiar with that. They also have other labor department programs, and there are state scholarship programs and tax credits as well. We have down here philanthropic organizations, sort of writ large. Those might be federal philanthropy, it might be regional. There are local foundations as well. It's important to just understand what that landscape looks like and how to tap into it. And when you're looking at your local community, You can look at things like your local government programs. The Community Development Block Grant happens at the local community level. There are private sectors, employers in your region who might be willing to make some investments. Your educational institutions may have a foundation that's part of their organization. There's a variety of types of funding, and it's just important to really understand the landscape and think about how you're going to connect to it. So let's get started with the federal funding first. So as I mentioned, the Department of Labor is one of those departments at the federal level that provides funding opportunities. And this is just a snapshot. There are other resources that are out there that once you get into it and start to really take a look at how to stay ahead of where the opportunity is at and how to access those things, this will all become a much broader universe for you. But this is just to take a little bit of a peek into what some of those opportunities are. So Department of Labor has the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. There's the WOTC tax credit, which is something we'll talk about more. There's H-1B skills training grants. Department of Education has some resources out there, Veterans Affairs, the Housing and Urban Development. I mentioned the Community Development Block Grant that happens at flows down to local communities. That's a HUD funded program. And then the Department of Agriculture also has the SNAP education and training. So those are just a couple of examples at the federal level. What Midwest Urban Strategies brings to the Early Childhood Workforce Connector is a deep understanding about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and how the public workforce system is positioned to support the early care industry as it looks to build registered apprenticeship programs and solve some of the other talent and growth needs that that sector has. The WIOA program, I'll talk a bit more when we get to the local section of this presentation, but know that the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, is intended to serve employers, workers, and really separates out categories of workers into adults and youth. And the services that it can provide include, supportive services, education, and skills training, career and technical education, and funding as well. The Worker Opportunity Tax Credit is an opportunity for employers who hire individuals from specific groups with barriers to employment to earn a tax credit that they can apply against their revenue, and that creates a tax savings for them. So this is a great opportunity. It goes woefully underutilized because there's paperwork that's necessary. But once you figure it out as a childcare employer, this is one of those resources that can really bring benefit and specific resource directly to your bottom line. So it's something worth taking a look at. When we look at the education and training requirements of registered apprenticeship, there are a few ways that we can look at covering the costs related to that. So for instance, there is at the Department of Education, there is a Pell Grant, which is a part of the financial aid that an individual can apply for. And that is money that is provided directly to an eligible student. And there is not a requirement for repayment. We probably all heard the challenges related to student loans, which does require repayment. The Pell Grant does not require any repayment. And then Perkins funding as well is another space to look at. School districts have career and technical education programs funded by the Perkins funds, and early childhood education is oftentimes one of the categories that CTE programs are building out. So how might you partner with that local school district or those local schools to bring those resources to support the program you're building or expanding? So in addition to that, we've got the Department of Health and Human Services with Early Head Start and Head Start. I don't know how many of you are currently using or are a Head Start agency. Those resources can support both the Head Start entity itself as well as the network of childcare providers in that region. And so it's important to know who your Head Start provider is and to have a relationship there. There's also the Child Care and Development Block Grant funding, Child Care and Development Fund, lots of resources at DHHS. And additionally, it's important to understand the resources that are allocated through the Department of Education for individuals with disabilities. And if any of your programs are serving children who have disabilities, it's important to understand what resources might exist there as well. I mentioned the Child Care and Development Fund, which is part of CCDBG, and this brings support for apprentices and funding for the professional development of staff. And so looking into and understanding what that CCDBG funding looks like is an important part of what you need to do as well. So next thing I want to spend some time with is state funding. And as I mentioned, states may have apprenticeship expansion grants, which are really designed to expand their registered apprenticeship programs. And there's also scholarship resources that are sometimes available. There are state tax credits like the federal WOTC credit. There are some states that have established registered apprenticeship tax credits that employers can access to offset the wages or training costs of those registered apprenticeship programs. And so it's important to understand what that state landscape looks like. You guys are probably familiar with Teach and Wages as scholarship and salary supplement funds that are available. Those do flow through states, and many of the ECE scholarships that exist are connected to higher education institutions. There are, again, just a variety of resources that you can access at the state level as well. Lastly, here I want to talk a bit about the local funding and what that universe looks like. So I mentioned that one of the things that Midwest Urban Strategies brings is expertise around connecting with the public workforce system, local workforce development board in that childcare entities community to get access to some of the resources that workforce boards have to support the development or expansion of their program. So just briefly, workforce development boards are the local entity that is responsible for coordinating services and strategies related to the development of the local workforce. Those funds flow from the federal government to the state and then down to local workforce boards who then disseminate those resources in partnership with local organizations at the community level to support both employers and job seekers or workers to advance the local economy and grow their workforce. So a few ways that workforce boards might support your early childhood education registered apprenticeship program include talking with them about the on-the-job learning portion of your registered apprenticeship program. There is an opportunity under the on-the-job learning category to develop an agreement with the Workforce Development Board that would bring some resources to support the OJL. The on-the-job learning requires that the apprentice has we call it a journey level employee or mentor who is there to help them while they're in their day-to-day work to practice the things that they've learned in their related technical instruction, to review their growth in the targeted areas that are laid out in the in their standards and support them in moving through their apprenticeship program. There's a cost to having somebody perform that work. They don't have as much time to spend focused on doing their own full-time job. And so there is an opportunity to bring some resource to help offset that quote unquote loss to the employer. And that's through on-the-job training contracts. That's all negotiated with your local workforce development board, and something you would have to work with them to see if they're able to bring those resources to you as the sponsor or employer. But that is something that is a possibility. Another area is the support that can be brought for childcare workers directly. That includes covering the costs or offsetting the costs of the related technical instruction. That is the direct coursework and the hours that need to be completed as part of the standards that need to be achieved in order to complete the registered apprenticeship program. We also know that for a lot of folks who are coming into this industry or looking to advance in it, life can happen, and especially when you are earning a low wage, when life happens and you don't have the resources, it helps to have somebody there able to offer some of the support that's necessary. So supportive services are another allowable way that workforce development boards can support childcare apprenticeship programs. And those support services could be anything from a computer, if they needed a computer to complete their training program. It could be, helping to cover the cost of a car repair if their car broke down. Or it could also be a bus pass if they need to get to work and they don't have that. In limited capacity, it might mean some support for childcare for their own children if there is some sort of challenge that they're having in a short-term way. And so those support services are really important ways to help to ensure that those folks who are working through the apprenticeship program have the wraparound supports necessary to help them be successful. And that is all managed by a person who sort of facilitates as a case manager who works with each individual person going through the program who's enrolled into the program at the Workforce Development Board. And they oversee that participants' progress through the training programs and supports that they're receiving. So that is Workforce Development Boards 101. And other ways that local areas are able to support registered apprenticeship programs are through partnerships with organizations in your community like Goodwill or United Way. Oftentimes United Way campaigns will have childcare focus, and so it's good to be connected there and understand how they make their investments. You can partner with community and technical colleges and universities. Sometimes you can do articulation agreements so that you can get college credit for the coursework. You can also use the faculty expertise in your on-the-job learning or related technical instruction. There's also sometimes an opportunity to collaborate and share facilities with those institutions. They oftentimes have nice campuses, and it can be helpful to have additional space. All right, so I sort of teased you with this idea that there are a lot of resources out there that we might need to think about combining in order to fully support our registered apprenticeship programs. So here's the poll. How familiar are you with combining different funding sources to support ECE registered apprenticeship programs? We'll give folks a few minutes. All right. So it's pretty close to almost unanimous here that I think there's some knowledge. 74% of you say you've heard of combining funding, but would like to learn more about it. And so you're at the right place. We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, and again, a bit about how to do it. We will have a future conversation that digs more into how to design eh, responses to opportunities so that you're equipped with that. This is much more of a high level look. So on to combining funds for early childhood education registered apprenticeship programs. I'm gonna completely screw this up because I can't say these words in this order without like my mouth getting all tangled, braided perhaps. But there is this idea about braiding, blending, and layering resources. See, I did it. In order to entirely cover, or at least come close to covering the costs that are necessary in order to run a high quality program. I want to bring your attention back to the slide that we looked at that considered all of the kinds of investments that are necessary in the early childhood education space. Facilities was one of them, advocacy was another, parent engagement was another. Those are all necessary investments that need to occur. And there isn't one source of funding that's going to get you to cover all of the things, even in your registered apprenticeship program, that need to be covered in order for that program to be fully functional and as successful as it can be. So to get there, what we do is look at how do we bring funding sources together in a way that addresses all of those areas that we know we need to resource, but don't have one single source of funds from which to do that. So I'm going to give you an example of one of the projects that we have worked with. And the Kentucky Governor's Office of Early Childhood, their registered apprenticeship program is one of our primary partners. They've been with us since the beginning, and we've learned a lot from how they have developed their registered apprenticeship program and how they have funded it. So they started with early childhood scholarships, and that brings together resources to help people achieve a variety of different credentials and degrees. So they may get their CDA or associate's degree, so on. They also brought in the resources of the preschool development grant, which comes out of the CCDBG funds. And they have a tobacco settlement fund, which they were able to target resources from to cover the costs related to the build of this registered apprenticeship program. And they also rely on the resources and supports of the Early Childhood Workforce Connector, which again is a Department of Labor funded industry intermediary organized specifically to support the development and expansion of registered apprenticeship programs in early childhood education. So we were able to walk alongside the Kentucky Governor's Office as they built out their registered apprenticeship program, as they registered it, and now as they're beginning to implement it. And our staff time, as well as the resources from our incentive fund, are all opportunities to help that program successfully establish itself and grow across the state of Kentucky. So there are a variety of partners that exist to make the registered apprenticeship program in Kentucky effective. And this is what we mean when we talk about braiding resources together. You're bringing together things like the Office of Employer and Apprenticeship. That's a state office. The Kentucky Career Center So that's a network of um, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, um, workforce development boards that are bringing those resources to the table. We have the Division of Childcare who's engaged, and the resources that they're putting in, either through the subsidy work that they do, or some of the regulatory supports, teach, wages, those sorts of things. In addition, out of the state's Office of Adult Education, the resources that come from that department are layered into the mix to make this program successful. A partner in the project is the Child Care Aware of Kentucky. So Child Care Aware is a national organization that has state affiliates, and they are an embedded part of how this program is functioning, and they bring their own set of resources. The idea here, and I think you're getting the sense of it, is that in order for us to successfully develop and launch a rigorous apprenticeship program that meets the requirements for registration, we have to bring in other partners and other entities to help us bring the necessary resources that can make it possible. So the Kentucky Chamber joined the efforts because those employers in the state of Kentucky who are not ECE employers, but just working in other industries, are not able to sustain a reliable workforce when their workers are challenged by access to quality childcare. And so they have a vested interest. And it's important, as Kentucky was able to move forward, it's important to get that employer community to understand that they need to have skin in the game in this work as well. It isn't up to just the early childhood education industry itself, which is already under-resourced, to figure out how to solve all of these problems. We need to bring the sort of universe of players who benefit from the services and supports of the early childhood education industry as full participants in bringing solutions forward. And so that is part of the work that the Early Childhood Workforce Connector is engaged in doing. You'll notice that the last word in our name is connector, and that's on purpose. Our goal is to really connect the resources and supports that are necessary in each local community. We do not operate an out-of-the-box model. We walk alongside each one of our partners as they develop a locally responsive program that meets the needs of their local community. And we help them to connect to the various resources that they need in order to be successful in that. And part of that is the program partners that will be layered into the development of that model so that they can achieve the success that they set out to do.
Tracy,
Yes.
we do have one question, and I wonder if this isn't on a lot of people's minds. The question is, it seems like most of these sources fund individual apprentices. How do you fund the administration of the programs as well as a sponsor?
That is a great question. I think that the answer to that question is complicated. I would say that much of what we've covered here in terms of the various types of funding opportunities, when you're doing your response or your request to them for resources, covering the costs of the administrative side of your work needs to be included in the design of that. And so happy to have, and maybe what we'll do is include that in a more fleshed out learning lab where we can dig more deeply into how you can segment out the various costs. Can I ask the person who asked that question, if you're willing, would you just join me for a second here and help me understand a little bit? Just give me some context.
So the question came from Katron Allred, and it looks like they may have left.
Oh, okay.
Katrin is my supervisor and she had a scheduling conflict. But we run the apprenticeship program through Santa Fe Community College in New Mexico. And right now we're primarily funded through ARPA funds through the city of Santa Fe and some private foundations.
Yes.
But those are all very short-term funding opportunities, and we're looking at more sustainability. And it seems like a lot of the funding sources that we've investigated have money embedded for the participants, money embedded for resource navigation and wraparound supports, but there seems to be a hole in the kind of payroll and just general administration piece of that.
Yep.
So we're trying to figure out, other than continually engaging in a cycle of grant work where we can embed that and have that be part of the ask, what else we could do.
Yeah. So I'm curious if something like the tax credits might be an option for you to look at. Some of that might be impacted, and we should schedule some time to just kind of explore this idea. But I do think that, you got to get creative, and I appreciate you being brave and asking that question, because this is one of those things that definitely is on the minds and hearts of all of us doing this work. I see that Robin has her hand raised. Robin, could we bring you in?
Absolutely. I'm very interested in this topic as well. I work for the State Apprenticeship Agency here in New Mexico. So Crystal, I will send you an email just to touch base with you. But that is definitely a common question in all different occupations. So I would, if you mentioned maybe having a learning lab that kind of went more in depth on that, I would love to have more information as well.
That would be fantastic. We'll make sure to get your contact information, Robin. If you could share that with Kelly, we'll make sure to follow up with both of you, and anybody else that's interested in a follow-up conversation about that. Please just drop that in the chat. We'll capture it and we will circle back to having that conversation. I said at the beginning that the early childhood education industry is fragile and it's under-resourced, and yet it is critical to the functioning of our economy, right? We all know that. The onus of facilitating the resources that are necessary to really sort of offset that end up sort of resting with those employers and sponsors who are working in the early care industry, or the states that are working to help to advance solutions. And so to the extent that we can bring other partners to the table, chambers, other groups that can help to offset some of those costs. We've heard some examples of strategies like developing, if there's a development project in your local area, developing project labor agreements as a way to set aside resources. There's a variety of different strategies that could be deployed, but we'll talk more about that when we get together. I wanted to provide another example, and this is just another way of looking at how the resourcing of registered apprenticeship has been brought to help to support its advancement. And this example begins with ARPA funds, as does everything as of late, it seems. So the state of Missouri received a significant influx of funding from ARPA, and they made the decision to invest some of those resources into their early childhood education space. And they did that through the local public workforce system. The workforce board in Kansas City has a long history and is very good at acting as a sponsor in registered apprenticeship programs. They did a lot of early work in registered apprenticeship in the healthcare industry. And so the state approached them and asked them if they would be willing to stand up a registered apprenticeship in early childhood education, and then support the rest of the state in participating in that program in order to bring resource to the early childhood education space and grow that workforce. And so they agreed to do that. They're in the midst of doing that as we speak. They were able to then bring together a wide variety of childcare providers across the Kansas City metro area and stand up as the sponsor that registered apprenticeship program within those local childcare providers. One of the benefits of having that workforce board act as the sponsor is that, getting back to the earlier question, it does help us to address some of the challenges that come with the responsibility for reporting on rapids, for making sure that we're tracking, the standards progression, all of that work that a sponsor is responsible for doing, embedding it in an entity like a workforce development board that has additional resources, that has perhaps a little more capacity to support that administrative work is one part of a solution. And that is what the Full Employment Council in Kansas City is doing. They are partnering with the Urban League in St. Louis, and the Urban League is working with the St. Louis YWCA Head Start program to stand up the apprenticeship program throughout the St. Louis region. And the YWCA's Head Start is a really important model for how registered apprenticeship programs can be disseminated more broadly from Head Start, which has certainly not nearly enough resource, but more resource than sort of traditional childcare programs have. They're able to then support those childcare providers that are a part of their local community, and they help to underwrite the infrastructure requirements to make that registered apprenticeship possible. They're doing that because the registered apprenticeship program, they have found, and this is true in Kansas City and St. Louis, to be a real talent attraction and retention strategy that works. They were really having problems prior to establishing the registered apprenticeship program with significant volume of churn. So they could not keep a teacher in a classroom. And so the registered apprenticeship program, by offering the opportunity to gain the credentials that allows a worker to move up the ladder at no cost to that worker, as well as the opportunity to increase their wages through that progressive wage, those have been two carrots that have been very effective tools to help them really stabilize their workforce. And we know in early childhood education, it's so critical to have a stable workforce that has the same teacher in that classroom consistently, and we don't see that turnover. So that has been one of the things that has really worked well. And they've been able to bring in the resources of the public workforce system. The Urban League has brought in resources that they've been able to secure both from the philanthropic community in St. Louis, as well as through the National Urban League, and then the resources that the YWCA has been able to secure and bring to support the broader network of childcare providers in their region has been a really sort of important strategy. One of the things that is really interesting that the YW has done is they have an internal process for the CDA validation. So they've got somebody on staff who is able to validate that portfolio. So they don't have to rely on the network of folks who are out there to validate those portfolios, which means that they're able to turn that around more quickly. So again, that's something that they have used their Head Start resources to secure, and it is now really adding value to their registered apprenticeship program because they're able to move people through and get them that credential much more efficiently and quickly. And so this is just an example, I guess, of how important relationships are in building out the necessary resources in order to accomplish your goals. So when we think about the work that happened in Kentucky, and we saw that laundry list of organizations that came together, layering their resources and braiding their funds in a way that allowed for that state to facilitate a registered apprenticeship program that is really going to have a significant impact on the care community that exists, and its ability to expand to meet the needs of the broader community that each of those childcare providers are serving. And as we're thinking about things like, I don't know if any of you have heard about the CHIPS and Science funding that was passed into law, and now there are a number of chips processing companies that are looking to build facilities that would allow us to build our own microchips here in the States, as opposed to having them built in China or other countries. COVID showed us how tender it was if we didn't have the ability to control that production process. And we all experienced that with some of the rise in prices for things, et cetera. But so the CHIPS and Science Act is going to invest billions with a B into the development of facilities that will have workers on site to produce these chips. And that workforce will need childcare. And so the folks at the United States Department of Commerce realized that that was going to be a need, and were courageous enough to require that those businesses looking to get those resources from the federal government develop a plan for how they were going to ensure access to childcare for both the construction workers who are building those facilities, as well as the eventual employees of those facilities. So that's yet another opportunity for us to think about how we might partner with within our communities with those employers who are looking to expand. Maybe they're not doing a chips manufacturing facility, but you have employers in your local network that are looking to expand their operations, and they need to understand the importance of access to childcare for their workforce, and see themselves as part of the solution to some of the challenges that we're all very familiar with. So I encourage you to really utilize the resources of the variety of organizations that exist to support the expansion of our local economies, of which childcare is a really integral part. And that includes the public workforce system. And they are in existence to meet the needs of employers locally, as well as job seekers. And so there is an opportunity to work with them to bring the resources and make the connections and build the relationships to help you properly resource your programs as you're looking to build or expand them. So I'm going to close this portion out with just a reminder that all of this really happens and partnerships are messy. And I guess that's what I really want to say. Partnerships are hard and messy. And so you have to be prepared and know that there are going to be challenges in the development of those relationships, and you've got to have a plan. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, you've got to have a plan for how you're going to resource your project. It's also important to have a plan for how you're going to navigate those relationships in order to properly bring the resources that you need to be successful. And so we will, in the upcoming Learning Lab, we'll have a conversation about how to build those partnerships and how to look at the resources and opportunities, and think about, what's a strategy to approach those opportunities so that you have some time and space to think that through and move forward with a well thought out plan to accomplish your goals. So with that, and I think I'm a little early, so that's okay. I want to open it up in case anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts. And this is how you get in touch with us. If you would like to schedule some individual time to talk about your program and what you're building and what your vision is and how you're dreaming about it, we're here to support you in that. So please do reach out. And I'll pause and see if anybody has any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share. Robin.
I just wanted to say that, actually, let me turn my camera on. Normally I do that whenever I'm speaking, but I forgot earlier. So I just wanted to say I love seeing these type of webinars and being a part of them. There's a huge drive for apprenticeship expansion, but a lot of times there's a disconnect with funding, and even for our office as a state apprenticeship agency, we don't offer funding. So, we try to connect people with various resources, but I would definitely love to see more examples of successful grading and layering and blending and what's out there, because there were some things I hadn't even thought of that you brought up today. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. That's great. Other thoughts or questions as we're looking to close out? Anybody on here, early childhood education provider or sponsor, willing to say something new that you learned today? Anybody on here that's an ECE provider or sponsor? What about any workforce board folks? Anybody on here who's with the workforce board that learned something new today or sparked an idea about how you might better support the early childhood education workforce?
Well, I'm with Workforce Board on the Kansas side in the Kansas City, Missouri area, and I learned more about the Missouri's registered apprenticeship and how that was funded. While we no longer have ARPA funds or ways to provide those fundings for employers, it was interesting to know who they partnered with in order to get started.
That's awesome. Points you, at least it points you in a direction, right, Roberta?
Very much so, yes.
Awesome, great. Well, I am not going to belabor, so I will send you back to your day and give you the gift of 30 minutes. I appreciate your time today and hope you'll join us on our next Learning Lab. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you.